The afternoon sun was spilling across the neighborhood, painting the sidewalks in a warm golden glow. I stood by the garden gate with a watering can in my hand, pretending to care about the petunias while Diane, my neighbor across the street, chatted away. We laughed about the new tenant who insisted on blasting music at ungodly hours, rattling the windows and keeping everyone awake. For a moment, it was comforting, just two women sharing a lighthearted complaint. I felt that easy connection, the kind that makes you grateful for familiar faces across the street. But then, Diane tilted her head, her words slicing through the warmth like a shard of glass. "Hey," she said, her voice casual, almost playful. "Could you give me your maid's number? I asked Paul last week, but he never sent it to me." I froze right there, the watering can suddenly heavier in my grip. Did I hear her right? Maid? My heart gave a sharp kick against my ribs, as if it knew something my mind hadn't dared consider yet. I forced a laugh, thin and shaky, trying to mask the sting in my chest. "We've never had a maid," I replied, my tone steadier than I felt. "Paul and I do everything ourselves." Diane frowned, clearly confused. "That's strange. I've seen a woman going into your house on Tuesdays and Fridays, usually when you're at work. Paul told me she was your maid." My smile wavered, and before I could stop myself, I lied. "Oh, yes, she's just a carpet cleaner." The words left a bitter taste on my tongue, but I wasn't about to let her see me unravel. Still, something inside me had shifted, and I couldn't shake the thought that maybe Diane had just handed me the key to a truth I wasn't ready to face. As Diane turned back to trimming her roses, I stood frozen, my smile plastered on like a mask I couldn't peel off. The watering can was still in my hand, but I had stopped pouring long ago. My mind replayed her words over and over. Tuesdays and Fridays. A woman at my house. Paul said she was the maid. Every syllable stung, sharp and deliberate, even though she probably hadn't meant it that way. I nodded once more, too quickly, as if that would dismiss the conversation entirely. When I finally slipped back inside, the silence was deafening. The house, spotless as always, mocked me in ways I hadn't noticed before. The faint scent of lavender polish lingered in the living room, sweet but suddenly suffocating. I remembered all the times I had come home from the office, surprised at how everything sparkled as if a fairy godmother had waved her wand. I thought Paul was just being thoughtful, helping me out while I worked late. How naive I had been. My heart pounded as I moved through each room, searching for... what, exactly? A hair on the pillow that wasn't mine? A glass with lipstick stains? Proof of the maid who only showed up when I was gone? Every creak in the house seemed louder, every shadow suspicious. I tried to push the thought away, tried to convince myself Diane was mistaken. But deep down, I knew better. And the more I thought about it, the more the fury inside me grew, daring me to do something about it. That night, as I folded the laundry with mechanical precision, I kept hearing Diane's voice in my head. The maid, Tuesdays and Fridays. Every detail clicked into place like a cruel puzzle I had ignored for too long. The times I came home to a perfectly made bed, the faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine lingering on the cushions, the way Paul's smile seemed just a little too forced when I asked about his day. Suddenly, none of it felt innocent anymore. I stared at the neatly stacked towels in my hands, realizing they weren't evidence of my husband's thoughtfulness, but of someone else's presence. My stomach turned, and I had to steady myself against the washing machine. How many times had I thanked Paul for helping out, while he stood there nodding, fully aware that he was feeding me a lie? The betrayal settled over me, heavy and suffocating. And yet, beneath the hurt, there was a simmering fire, a quiet storm beginning to form. I didn't say a word to Paul that evening. I couldn't. He chatted about his day as if nothing had happened, as if our marriage was the same as it had always been. I just smiled, nodded, and poured him a glass of wine, all while my mind spun with plans I wasn't ready to voice. If there really was a woman walking into my house when I wasn't home, I was going to find her. And when I did, well, let's just say Paul wouldn't see it coming. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to Paul's steady breathing beside me, every rise and fall of his chest a cruel reminder of how easily he could lie with that same calm face. My mind replayed Diane's words on a loop, her voice whispering about the maid, who appeared only when I wasn't home. I stared at the ceiling, my heart racing, wondering if this was the answer to all those nagging doubts I had brushed aside. I thought about the countless times I'd walked through the front door, exhausted from a long day at the office, only to find the living room spotless and the faint aroma of jasmine perfume floating in the air. It wasn't mine, never was, but Paul always brushed it off with a joke. "Maybe you're just imagining things," he'd say, his smile just a little too quick, a little too rehearsed. I wanted to believe him. God, I chose to believe him. But Diane's words tore that choice away. I remembered other things too. The way Paul always looked at his phone when I left, the way he avoided meeting my eyes when I came home on Fridays, tiny cracks I had painted over, now breaking wide open. My chest ached with a mix of shame and fury. Had everyone else known before me? Was I the fool playing house while another woman scrubbed away my dignity? No, I couldn't live in guesses anymore. I had to know the truth, and I knew exactly how I'd find it. I started noticing everything. The way Paul suddenly had excuses not to come with me to the supermarket, how he lingered a little too long in the bathroom with his phone, how his shirts seemed freshly pressed even when I hadn't touched the iron. These were the little things that had been hiding in plain sight. The puzzle pieces fit together so neatly now, it almost felt like he'd wanted to be caught. Or maybe I was finally opening my eyes to a truth that had been slapping me for months. I thought about the woman Diane saw. Tuesdays and Fridays, my so-called office days. The irony stung. I used to love those afternoons, thinking Paul had the house to himself, finally relaxing after his long shifts. I never imagined he was spending them with someone else. The question burned inside me. Who was she? A stranger? Someone I knew? My mind jumped to faces, his co-workers, our neighbors, women we'd met at dinner parties. Each possibility felt like a dagger pressed to my skin. I felt the betrayal seeping into every corner of my body, turning my blood to fire and my stomach to stone. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted justice. I wasn't the type to scream or throw things, not anymore. No, my revenge would be quieter, sharper. It would cut him where it hurt most. But first, I had to see it with my own eyes. And so I began to plan what I'd do that next Friday, when I was supposed to be at the office. I went through the house like a detective, opening closets, drawers, even the laundry basket. And there it was, proof staring me in the face. A red lipstick wedged between the couch cushions, its cap slightly cracked. I never wore red. Paul hated it on me. My hands shook as I held it, as if I were gripping a piece of evidence at a crime scene. My knees threatened to buckle, but I forced myself to stay standing. I slipped the lipstick into my robe pocket like a secret weapon, my mind already racing ahead. Every gesture Paul had made lately, every sudden errand, every faint whiff of unfamiliar perfume, every evening where his phone seemed glued to his hand, was no longer innocent. It was calculated, a rehearsed performance to cover up whatever he was doing behind my back. And suddenly, I didn't feel like the naive wife anymore. I felt like a woman on the verge of reclaiming control. That night, while Paul sat across from me at the dinner table, talking about his day as if nothing had changed, I just nodded, my heart strangely calm. I didn't accuse him. I didn't cry. Instead, I made a silent promise to myself. I would stop wondering. I would stop doubting. I would stop waiting. And when Friday came, I'd be ready to step into my own home at just the right moment. Friday arrived heavier than any other day. I woke up before dawn, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing every possible outcome in my head. Paul kissed my forehead, handed me my coffee, and said, "Don't work too hard, love." His lips lingered just a little too long, as if he were overcompensating. I smiled back, hiding the storm brewing inside me. He thought I was heading downtown, like always. He had no idea I was already planning my return. I drove out of the neighborhood like any other Friday, waving to Diane, who was watering her roses again. My heart pounded as I passed the corner, forcing myself not to look back at the house. Once I was far enough, I pulled into a small gas station and parked behind the convenience store. My hands were clammy against the steering wheel, but my mind was clear. For the first time in months, I wasn't confused. I had a plan, and it felt empowering. I waited. Hours crawled by, each tick of the clock gnawing at me. I kept replaying memories, times when Paul said he had work to finish, times when I felt his body next to me in bed but sensed his mind was elsewhere. The more I remembered, the sharper the picture became. Around 3 in the afternoon, my pulse quickened as I saw a sleek black car pull up in front of my house. A woman stepped out, her heels clicking on the pavement. She carried a shopping bag, and when Paul opened the door, he didn't hesitate. He kissed her. My throat burned, but I stayed still, waiting, calculating. From where I sat in my car, the scene felt like a cruel performance staged just for me. She laughed as she brushed her hair back, leaning into him as though she belonged there. Paul looked younger somehow, lighter, like a man who didn't carry the weight of a wife who trusted him. My chest tightened, a painful knot growing inside me. I wanted to scream, to march up right then and rip the door off its hinges, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed put, fingers digging into the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Every second that passed stretched like an eternity, each giggle from inside my home slicing me open. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I told myself to breathe. No rash moves, not yet. If I was going to do this, it had to be perfect, sharp enough to leave a scar he'd never forget. So I waited. Minutes turned to hours, and the shadows of the trees crept across the pavement like silent witnesses. The world outside my car carried on. Kids rode their bikes, a delivery truck honked, someone's lawnmower roared. But all I could see was that door, that house, my house, harboring a secret. I had given Paul everything, my time, my trust, my love. And in return, he gave me this humiliation. Well, the next move would be mine, and I knew exactly how I would make it. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, I finally made my move. I stepped out of the car, heels crunching against the gravel, my pulse steady now, not from nerves, but from something colder, sharper. My body felt like it was moving on instinct, each step deliberate, fueled by a quiet fury that had been simmering for too long. The closer I got to the house, the louder the music grew, muffled laughter spilling out between the beats. I slid the key into the lock and turned it slowly, savoring the sound of the latch giving way. My heart didn't race anymore. In fact, there was a strange calmness inside me, as if I'd already said goodbye to the woman I used to be. The scent of red wine hit me first, mingling with that same sweet perfume that had haunted my evenings. And then I heard it. Her laugh, sharp and ringing, followed by Paul's low voice. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The living room looked like something out of a magazine, wine glasses sweating on the coffee table, a record spinning in the corner, and in the middle of it all, Paul, his hands firmly around her waist, his lips still glistening from hers. For a moment, he froze, his mouth half open, eyes wide like a guilty child caught red-handed. I didn't hesitate. I let the door slam behind me, and with every ounce of calm I could muster, I prepared to speak the words that would shatter his carefully constructed lie. The music was still playing when I stepped into the living room, low and sultry, as if the house itself was complicit in their little performance. My eyes darted around, wine glasses half full, his tie loosened, her shoes abandoned by the door. It was a scene I never thought I'd witness in my own home. Paul leapt up, his face drained of color, stammering words that clung to the air like smoke. "It's not what it looks like," he started, but I'd heard enough. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange power wash over me, like I had been asleep for years and was finally awake. I raised my hand, silencing him before he could even think of another excuse. "Drop the act," I said, my voice sharper than glass. His mistress stood there, trembling, her blouse half buttoned, clutching that ridiculous shopping bag like it could shield her from the truth. The perfume on her skin was unmistakable. It was the same scent that had haunted me for weeks. Paul tried to move toward me, but I stepped back, my eyes locked on his. "You told Diane she was the maid," I said, each word cutting deeper than a knife. "So tell me, Paul, does she clean the house before or after you're done with her?" The silence that followed was deafening. His mouth opened, then closed, like he couldn't find a single lie that would save him. I could see the panic rising in his eyes, and that was when I knew. This was only the beginning of what I had planned for him. She fumbled with her bag, her lipstick rolling onto the floor as she tried to scoop up her things. I didn't bend down to help. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching her scramble like a guilty teenager caught sneaking out past curfew. Her cheeks flushed crimson, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped her keys. Paul kept mumbling, "Wait, Agatha, let me explain." But his excuses sounded hollow before they even left his lips. I walked calmly to the hallway closet, pulled out the suitcase I had packed earlier in the week, and dropped it onto the floor with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the room, silencing even the record that had just finished its song. Paul's eyes flicked to the suitcase, then back to me, panic flooding his face. "What is this?" he asked, his voice cracking. I didn't answer. Instead, I pointed to it, daring him to connect the dots. "Your ride's outside," I said, tilting my head toward the front door where Diane's figure lingered in her yard, pretending to fuss over her flowers while clearly watching every second unfold. Paul looked at me, then at the window, realizing that his humiliation wasn't private anymore. He had wanted secrecy, shadows, little Tuesday rendezvous, but I wasn't about to let him hide in the dark anymore. And as he stared at me, searching for mercy that wasn't coming, I felt the first taste of freedom bloom on my tongue. The mistress bolted first, clutching her bag to her chest like it held her dignity, nearly tripping on her heels as she fled past Diane's curious eyes. I didn't bother stopping her. She wasn't my problem. My problem was the man standing in front of me, my husband, my partner, my betrayer. He reached out, but I stepped aside, leaving him to stumble toward the suitcase I had dropped. His hand hovered over it, as if touching it would burn. "Agatha, please," he whispered, his voice stripped of the confidence he wore so easily with her. I met his gaze, my own steady, cold, unflinching. "You wanted her to play maid?" I said softly, almost sweetly. "Then pack your things, Paul, because this house, it's no longer yours to dirty." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew he'd lost the one thing he could never replace: me. Outside, I could see the curtains twitch, neighbors peeking out, hungry for gossip. I opened the door wide and gestured for him to go, watching as he dragged the suitcase onto the porch. The shame on his face was louder than any words he could say. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of peace settle over me, steady and unyielding. But peace was only the beginning. My real freedom, my real revenge, was waiting for me on the other side of this moment. The silence after Paul left was almost holy. I stood in the doorway for a long while, staring at the empty space where his car had been, my heart still hammering, but lighter than it had been in months. The house felt different already, as if it was exhaling for the first time in years. For once, there was no need to question what I might find when I walked into my own living room. It was just me, and strangely, that felt enough. The gossip spread like wildfire, of course. Diane didn't even have to say a word. The entire street had witnessed Paul dragging his suitcase down the steps, red-faced and fumbling. I should have felt embarrassed, maybe even humiliated. But instead, I let them talk. Let them whisper. Let them dissect every detail. I wasn't the one who had to hang his head in shame anymore. He was. With Paul gone, I began reclaiming every corner he had tainted. I pulled the sheets from the bed and washed them, not because they needed cleaning, but because I wanted to erase every trace of her. I opened the windows, letting fresh air sweep through the house, carrying away the lies. And as I moved through each room, I felt stronger, steadier, freer. But little did Paul know, my final act of revenge was still to come. The first few days without him were oddly quiet, almost unsettling. I found myself listening for his footsteps, his keys jingling, his careless humming down the hallway. but all I heard was the sound of my own breath. At first, that silence felt empty, like the echo of a loss I hadn't yet processed. But slowly, I realized it wasn't emptiness at all. It was space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to finally live for me. I filled the house with things that felt like mine. New curtains, fresh linens, flowers in every corner. I painted the bedroom walls a soft sage green, a color Paul would have hated. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he had stolen. I didn't just clean the house. I scrubbed away the weight of his lies, the shadows of her perfume, the silence that used to suffocate me. For the first time, my home truly belonged to me. And then there was Diane. She came over with her easy laugh and a plate of lemon squares, insisting we needed a little sweetness after such bitterness. We sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee, trading stories, and for once, I didn't feel the need to hide anything. She knew, I knew, and somehow that honesty felt like a gift. But as we laughed, as sunlight poured across the table, I realized my revenge wasn't complete yet. There was one last step I needed to take, one final act that would close this chapter forever. On Monday morning, I dressed with a new kind of purpose. No more pretending, no more playing the loyal wife who smiles through betrayal. I walked into the lawyer's office with my head held high and signed the divorce papers with a steady hand. Each stroke of the pen felt like cutting one more tie that bound me to his lies. The weight I had carried for years seemed to slide right off my shoulders. By the end of the week, Paul was gone, his reputation in tatters. The neighborhood whispered, yes, but their eyes told me the truth. They admired the way I had handled it. Even his mistress disappeared, vanishing as quickly as she had arrived. He was left with nothing but a suitcase and the bitter taste of losing everything he thought he owned. And me? I wasn't broken. I was free. One evening I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down in my living room. The place smelled of fresh lilies, the kind I loved, but Paul never bought me. My hands rested on the clean sofa, no trace of her perfume lingering anymore. I looked around at my little sanctuary, feeling peace for the first time in years. I smiled to myself, raising the glass in a silent toast. After all, he called her the maid. Now he's the one taking out the trash.